Welcome to Professor Pincushion. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can create the Hong Kong finish. I'm going to show you how to do it in the seam allowance and then also in the hem. What's nice about this finish is that you're enclosing all the raw edges, so the inside of your garment is going to appear very neat. This is why you're going to see it in high-end garments. So let's go ahead and get started. First, I'm going to show you on how to do this finish on a normal seam. So here's my demo seam that I'm going to be doing on, and you start it out normal just as you would any other seam. Go ahead and stitch at your seam allowance and then press your seam open. Next, we're going to be cutting our bias strips. You can use pre-made bias tape for this, but I'm going to go ahead and show you how to cut your own bias strips. Now, normally you want to use something that's going to match whatever it is you're doing this finish for. But because I want it to stand out, I'm going to go ahead and do a contrasting one. And I'm doing a lightweight fabric. It's a poly cotton because I want something that's going to be lightweight. So the first thing is, here's my fabric. It's just a small piece of it. I'm going to take this top corner here and I'm going to bring it over. So I'm just folding over. I'm going to make sure this edge then lines up with this edge over here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my rotary cutter and my ruler, and you can do this with scissors if you want. It's just faster if you have a mat. And what I'm going to do is cut out 1-inch strips this way, so it's parallel to your fold here. Now, of course, since it's folded here, the first strip that you cut out is, when you unfold it, it's going to be 2 inches. So you might want to just press this fold and then cut along the fold, so then you end up with 1-inch strips. Now, if you have a fabric marker and you don't have a clear ruler, what you can do is just use your sewing gauge and ruler, and you can mark the 1-inch mark so you have something to use as a guide. Or with this ruler, I can clearly see that this is going to be where my 1 inch is. So I'm lining up my 1-inch mark with the fold, and then I'm going to use my ruler to cut it out. Now, the width, of course, of the strips is 1 inch. The length depends on how long your seam is that you're finishing, because of course you're going to do both sides of the seam. So you may need to cut several strips and then sew them together. If you need tips on being able to do that, definitely check out our tutorial on making your own bias tape. So right now I'm going to go ahead and cut out a few strips that are the 1 inch width, and then we're going to go back to our seam. Next, you're going to cut your strips so that it's the length of your seam allowance that you're doing here. And you actually need to do it twice because we're going to have one on this side and one on this side. But we're just going to do one side at a time. So just take one of your strips and you're going to lay it right side to right side of the seam allowance, lining up one edge only. So only this edge with the edge of the strip. And then I'm going to pin the strip to the seam allowance only. Not this fabric under here, just the seam allowance. And I'm not doing this side yet. I'm just going to be doing this side only. So I'm going to go ahead, pin this all down, and then take it to the machine. I'm going to go ahead and stitch a 1/4 inch seam allowance on this. And I'm just doing a regular width stitch. Don't forget to back stitch. Now, before you start sewing, of course, obviously make sure that underneath you only have your seam allowance. So the part of the fabric that was underneath it, I pull it all out so it's all going in this direction. And it's just the seam allowance and the bias strip that I'm stitching together. So we don't want to stitch anything together that we shouldn't. And of course, use a matching thread if you can. I'm going ahead and using a contrast just so it stands out a little bit better. After you finish stitching these two pieces together, go ahead and press your strip away from your bias tape. So when I originally stitched it, it was like this. Here's my seam allowance between those two. And I'm going to take it, open it up, so I have the blue next to my seam allowance. I'm going to make sure that the seam allowance here between these two pieces is underneath my strip fabric. So if I was to flip this over, it would look something like this. So here's my blue and here's the seam allowance between these two pieces. Now the next step, what it's going to be is you're going to take this part of the strip that's now sticking up and you're going to fold it over so that it covers the stitches. You can see my white stitch here. You're just going to fold it over and you're going to pin it all along this whole area here, because then we're going to stitch that down. Lastly, what I'm going to do is a top stitch. So all I'm going to do is stitch right on the side of my strip, so in this case the blue, right next to the seam line between the blue and the green fabric here. And again, I'm just using a regular stitch, making sure that there's nothing else underneath this. All I'm going to be doing is stitching down the raw edge of my blue strip fabric to the underside of that seam allowance. Don't forget to back stitch on both sides. And I'm just trying to get as close as I can to that seam line again. Once one side is completed, you can go ahead and do the same exact thing on the other side. So now this is done. And if I was to flip this over to the wrong side of the seam allowance, you can see my stitches right here. So what we have now is the raw edges of our original seam allowance is now enclosed in our strip. So now it looks really nice and neat. So what if you wanted to do the same type of finish for a hem? Well, the first thing you need to do is you need to fold up and press like you would do a normal hem, the start of it. So all I did is from the right side to the wrong side, I folded up about 1.25 inches and I pressed it. Then you're going to have your bias strips again. They're 1 inch by however long your hem is going to be. One side of the raw edge of the strip is going to be pinned to the raw edge of the hem. Just the raw edge of the hem is not being pinned to this fabric that's underneath here. And you're making sure that you go right side to right side. So I'm going to go ahead and pin this. And then right at this top again, you're going to stitch your 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then just as before, you're going to take your strip, you're going to press it up towards the top of your garment. And if we look under here, you can see the raw edge here is being pressed up underneath my strip. So I can feel the edge right here. So then what we're going to do is you're going to take the raw edge of the strip that's still showing and you're going to fold it over. So the fold is going to be right at the top of this raw edge here. So you're not actually folding that over. So you're going to fold it really neatly over that raw edge. And at this point, I'm going to grab my straight pins here. You can go ahead and pin it down, but this time I'm actually going through this fabric here because I'm going to pin my hem into place. The only difference is I'm just folding over my strip. So now I have a nice, clean folded edge here at the top. You have a couple of different options for finishing this hem. So the first way, which is the basic way of doing hem, which I like, is just with the machine. I'm just going to stitch right at the top of the fold line. If you want to be like the other one where it's a top stitch right close to the seam line, you can do that as well, but I kind of like it at the top. So I'm just doing a regular stitch. Don't forget to back stitch again. And I'm just getting as close to that top fold line as I can. If you want your hem stitching to be a little bit more invisible, you can hand stitch a blind hem. So I'm going to do that right now. I have some needle and thread right here. All I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a little bit of the inside fold of my strip here, right on the fold. Make sure my knot's tucked in there. And then I'm going to grab right at the top of the fold a little bit of my main fabric. So that's going to be this fabric here. And you'll see I'm getting as close as I can to the fold. And then I'm going to grab a little bit more of my blue fabric right on the fold again. Whoops. And then a little bit of the main fabric right next to that fold. So it's a little bit more time consuming, but definitely the stitching will look more invisible if you do it right. So I just go back and forth between the two. So you can see my red thread right here, but if I was using something that was matching, it would definitely be less noticeable. Here's a sample of the finished hem. So over here you can see I did the machine stitching, and then starting right here I did the blind hem stitching. So this one's definitely less noticeable and a lot neater looking. But that is how you do the Hong Kong finish for both the hem and also for the seam allowance. Make sure to check out our other videos and visit ProfessorPincushion.com to view our complete library with well over 150 sewing video tutorials. New tutorials are released regularly, so make sure to subscribe to be notified of the next release. Thanks for watching!